There are two supplements sitting in more medicine cabinets than almost anything else right now. Omega-3 fish oil, vitamin D3. And if you are over 60, there is a good chance you take both of them every single morning. Probably right after breakfast. Probably from the same handful of capsules you've been swallowing for years. Here is what almost no one tells you. The way most seniors take these two supplements quietly works against them. Not because the supplements are dangerous, they are not, but because the combination has a hidden variable, a biological condition that has to be met, and when it isn't, those capsules may be passing right through you without doing what you think they are doing. Before this video is over, I want to show you exactly what I tell my patients in the clinic. Why the timing, the sequence, and what you eat when you take them matters far more than the dose. And why two other nutrients, ones most people never think about, determine whether any of this reaches your brain at all. Let's start with what actually happens inside your body the moment you swallow these two supplements together. Both omega-3 and vitamin D3 are fat-soluble. That sounds like a small technical detail, but it changes everything about how they work. Unlike vitamin C, which dissolves in water and absorbs easily, fat-soluble nutrients need dietary fat to be absorbed at all. Without fat present in your gut at the time you take them, your body simply cannot process them properly. This is the most common reason I see in my clinic why people's levels stay low despite years of supplementation. To understand exactly how this happens, you need to know what your gut actually does with these nutrients. Your digestive system uses something called bile salts, produced by your liver and released into your small intestine, to break fat-soluble nutrients down into tiny droplets so they can be carried across the gut wall and into your bloodstream. I think of bile salts like a ferry system. They carry fat-soluble passengers across the water, but the ferry only runs when there is enough fat in the meal to trigger it. A piece of toast and black coffee? That ferry barely leaves the dock. Now here is where omega-3 and vitamin D3 get complicated when you take them together. Both nutrients travel through the same intestinal transport system. They are packaged into the same microscopic structures called micelles, formed from bile salts and dietary fat. And when two fat-soluble nutrients arrive at the same time, competing for space in the same transport vehicles, absorption becomes a crowded, inefficient process. But there is something even more specific happening here. And this is the part that surprised many of my patients when I explained it to them. Research has shown that when you take omega-3 fatty acids alone, without vitamin D3 alongside them, they can actually lower your circulating vitamin D levels. Not because omega-3 is toxic to vitamin D, but because omega-3 accelerates certain metabolic enzymes that process vitamin D faster than your body can hold onto it. You are essentially burning through your vitamin D before it has a chance to be used. The good news is that taking them together appears to reverse this effect. The combination stabilizes vitamin D levels, but only when there is adequate dietary fat present to trigger proper absorption in the first place. This is the quiet inefficiency I see so often. Someone has been taking both supplements every morning for 2 years. They feel confident. They think they are doing everything right, but they are taking them with minimal food or with a low-fat breakfast, and neither nutrient is being absorbed efficiently enough to matter at the cellular level. The result is not danger. There is no alarm to sound here. But there is a real cost. You are spending money on capsules, and your blood levels may still be sitting below the threshold where these nutrients actually protect your brain. But getting into your bloodstream is only the first obstacle. Because once these nutrients are circulating, they still have to get past something far more selective. And this is where omega-3 and vitamin D3 stop behaving like the same nutrient entirely. So let's say absorption goes well. You took your supplements with a good fat-rich meal. The bile salts did their job. The micelles formed. Omega-3 and vitamin D3 made it into your bloodstream. Now what? Now they face something far more selective: the blood-brain barrier. Think of it as the brain's security checkpoint. Your brain is the most protected organ in your body, and it has a tight, specialized lining around its blood vessels that controls exactly what gets in and what doesn't. Most things circulating in your bloodstream never make it through. Nutrients, toxins, medications. The brain screens all of it. Only what the brain specifically allows gets access. Omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, which stands for docosahexaenoic acid, have a dedicated transporter built right into the blood-brain barrier. It is called MFSD2A. Think of it as a specialized door, one that was designed specifically to let DHA walk through. Scientists have actually been able to image this transporter using advanced microscopy, and what they found is that it forms a small, bowl-shaped structure that physically binds to DHA molecules and carries them across into brain tissue. DHA does not just drift into your brain passively, it is actively pulled in. This matters enormously for understanding why DHA accumulates in the brain over time with consistent supplementation. Clinical trials have confirmed that after several months of daily omega-3 supplementation, DHA levels rise measurably in the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that bathes your brain and spinal cord. The brain is genuinely hungry for it, and when you supply it consistently, the transporter puts it to work. Vitamin D3 has no confirmed equivalent at the blood-brain barrier. There is no known dedicated transporter pulling it directly into brain tissue the way MFSD2A pulls in DHA. Its neurological benefits appear to work differently, more indirectly, through reducing inflammation throughout the body and supporting the biological conditions that allow the brain to function well. It helps regulate the immune response that, when overactive, damages neurons. It supports the small blood vessels that feed your brain tissue. It influences the clearance of amyloid, the protein that builds up in Alzheimer's disease. These are real and meaningful contributions, but they work systemically, not through a direct door into the brain the way DHA does. This distinction is one of the most important things I explain to patients who come in asking about these two supplements. DHA is actively transported into brain tissue. Vitamin D supports the environment that makes that possible. I think about a woman I saw not long ago, diligent, informed, doing everything she believed was right, whose cognitive markers were quietly drifting in the wrong direction despite years of consistent supplementation. The biology was working against her in ways the bottle label never warned her about. So the biology is clear on how these two nutrients move and where they diverge. But what the biology cannot tell us on its own is whether any of this actually translates into protection for your brain over time. For that, we need to look at what happens when researchers put real people on these supplements and measure the results. So let me bring some real data into this conversation, because I think you deserve more than general reassurance. You deserve to know what the research actually found, and what it didn't. The most important study ever done on this exact question involved over 2,000 adults aged 70 and older across 5 European countries. It was called the Do Health Trial. Researchers gave participants vitamin D3 at 2000 IU per day, omega-3 at 1 gram per day, or a simple home exercise program in various combinations, and followed them for 3 years. This was rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled research, the gold standard. Here is what they found. When all 3 interventions were combined, vitamin D3, omega-3, and regular exercise, participants showed a meaningful reduction in cancer risk and measurable slowing of biological aging markers. That is significant. These are not small findings. Biological aging, measured through DNA methylation, slowed by nearly 3 to 4 months over the course of 3 years. For cancer incidence, the reduction was striking enough to be one of the first randomized trial results of its kind in this age group. But cognitive function alone, looking at supplementation without exercise, showed no statistically significant improvement. I want you to sit with that because it matters for your situation directly. The combination works. The biology is real, but it does not work in isolation. Movement increases blood flow and opens the pathways that allow DHA to do its job. Without that piece, the supplements were working against a closed system. Now here is the absorption interaction piece, because this directly connects to what we talked about in your gut. One study found that omega-3 taken alone actually decreased circulating vitamin D levels in participants who were already vitamin D deficient. In that trial, omega-3 supplementation without D3 dropped vitamin D blood levels significantly over 8 weeks. But when the two were taken together, that effect reversed. Vitamin D levels rose. The combination protected and stabilized what the individual supplement was quietly depleting. This is why I never tell my patients to separate these two. Taking them together, with adequate fat, appears to be the most protective approach, precisely because the combination counteracts the depletion effect that omega-3 alone can cause. Now I want to address one piece of data that sometimes gets misread in online discussions. There is a rat study showing that combined D3 and omega-3 supplementation led to signs of incomplete absorption and some changes in gut lining tissue. People have used this to argue against taking these supplements together at all. I want to be honest with you about what that data actually means. It was an animal study, not a human study. The mechanisms in rat gut physiology are not directly equivalent to ours, and the doses used were proportionally very high. What this study does tell us is that how you take these supplements matters. The conditions under which you absorb them are not trivial. It does not tell us that the combination is harmful in humans when taken appropriately. And then there is the brain injury research. In a mouse model of traumatic brain injury, animals given both DHA and vitamin D3 for 30 days after the injury showed neurotrauma markers return to near pre-injury levels. DHA accumulated in brain tissue. Vitamin D worked systemically to reduce inflammation. Together, they addressed both the structural need inside the brain and the inflammatory environment surrounding it. Neither alone produced the same result. What all of this tells us, taken together, is something I find genuinely encouraging. These two supplements are a real team. The evidence for prevention is meaningful. The biology is sound. But the assumption that swallowing them is enough, without understanding the conditions they need to work, is where most people quietly lose the benefit they are trying to gain. And the biggest factor most people get wrong is the simplest one: timing. Let me tell you the single most common mistake I see, and I see it constantly, across patients of all backgrounds, all income levels, all levels of health literacy. They take both supplements first thing in the morning, with a small breakfast, or sometimes no food at all. Maybe a piece of toast, maybe just coffee. They swallow the capsules, they feel responsible, and they move on with their day. And nothing terrible happens, which is exactly why the mistake persists. There is no warning signal, no side effect, just quiet, invisible inefficiency. Here is the biology behind why this matters so much. Research shows that absorption of fat-soluble nutrients can increase by 200 to 300% when you take them with a meal containing at least 20 grams of healthy fat, compared to taking them without food. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between a supplement that works and one that mostly passes through you. The fat in your meal triggers the release of a hormone called cholecystokinin, which signals your digestive system to produce bile and activate the full absorption pathway that these nutrients depend on. Without that trigger, the process is sluggish. The ferry barely runs, as I described earlier. So what does 20 grams of healthy fat actually look like on a plate? 2 eggs cooked in olive oil gets you close. Half an avocado with your meal gets you there. A piece of salmon, a small handful of almonds, a drizzle of olive oil over vegetables. These are the kinds of foods that create the environment your supplements need. A piece of dry toast does not. A glass of orange juice does not. Black coffee does not. These are common breakfasts in many households, and they are genuinely not enough fat to drive proper absorption of either omega-3 or vitamin D3. Now, does the time of day matter beyond meal composition? Somewhat. Your digestive system follows a daily rhythm. Enzyme production and bile flow tend to be naturally more active in the morning and early afternoon. So there is a mild biological advantage to morning dosing if your breakfast contains adequate fat. But I want to be honest with you. That circadian edge is secondary. It does not compensate for taking these supplements with the wrong meal. An evening dose with a fat-rich dinner will outperform a morning dose with a low-fat breakfast every single time. This is actually good news. It means the timing question is not complicated. It does not require a schedule. It requires one thing. Take your supplements with a meal that contains real fat, whatever time of day that meal happens to be. Now here is a practical refinement for those of you taking higher amounts of omega-3, more than 1 gram per day. Consider splitting the dose. Take half with your morning meal and half with your evening meal. There are 2 reasons for this. First, it reduces the digestive side effects that some people experience with larger single doses. The fishy aftertaste, the mild reflux. Second, distributing the dose across 2 fat-containing meals may improve overall absorption consistency rather than asking your gut to process everything at once. And about the question of whether to take omega-3 and vitamin D3 at the same time or separately, based on everything we have covered about the depletion effect, taking them together with the same fat-rich meal is the approach that makes the most biological sense. The combination stabilizes vitamin D levels. Separating them reintroduces the risk that omega-3 alone quietly depletes the vitamin D you are trying to build. One meal, real fat, both supplements together. That is the correction most people need, and it costs nothing to make. But here is what I have learned from years of reviewing blood work with patients who did everything right on the timing front, and still came back with levels that should have been higher. There is another layer to this, one that sits completely outside the question of when you take these supplements, and closer to what your body can actually do with them once they arrive. Most people think about vitamin D3 as a single, self-contained supplement. You take it, it works. But that is not how your body actually processes it. Vitamin D3 is more like a key, and magnesium is the hand that holds it. Without magnesium present in adequate amounts, the enzymatic conversion of vitamin D3 into its active form is significantly impaired. And once we get through magnesium, there is a second cofactor that determines where the calcium vitamin D releases actually ends up, including whether it stays out of places you absolutely do not want it. Here is what that means in practical terms. Vitamin D3, as it comes out of a capsule, is not yet usable. Your liver and kidneys have to convert it through two separate chemical steps before it becomes the active form your brain and body can actually use. Both of those conversion steps require magnesium as a cofactor. Think of magnesium as the enzyme activator, the biological machinery that makes the whole process run. Without it, the raw vitamin D3 you swallow stalls partway through the pipeline. You may be taking 2000 IU every day and still ending up with very little active vitamin D in your system. And here is the part that concerns me most about the seniors I see in my clinic. Magnesium deficiency is extremely common in this age group, and it is almost entirely invisible until you look for it. Common medications quietly deplete it over time. Proton pump inhibitors, the acid-reducing drugs many people take for reflux, reduce magnesium absorption in the gut. Diuretics, prescribed for blood pressure or fluid retention, pull magnesium out through the kidneys. Even some blood pressure medications affect magnesium balance over the long term. You can be taking a supplement faithfully and still be running low on the very mineral that makes it work. Now let me introduce the second missing cofactor, because it connects directly to what vitamin D3 does once it is active. Vitamin D3 increases your body's absorption of calcium. That sounds straightforwardly good. Stronger bones, better nerve function. And it is, provided that calcium ends up where it belongs. This is where vitamin K2 comes in. Think of K2 as the traffic director. When vitamin D3 pulls calcium into your bloodstream, K2 is responsible for directing that calcium to your bones and teeth, and away from your soft tissue and artery walls. Without adequate K2, higher dose vitamin D3 supplementation over time carries a small but real risk of calcium depositing in the wrong places. In the walls of your blood vessels, in the small arteries that feed your heart, and critically, your brain. This matters for neurological health in a very direct way. Your brain is fed by a dense network of tiny vessels. Those vessels need to stay clear and flexible to deliver oxygen and nutrients to your neurons. Calcification in those vessels, even mild calcification, restricts blood flow and accelerates the kind of vascular damage that contributes to cognitive decline over time. I had a patient who had been taking high-dose D3 for 3 years. He felt confident in his routine, had read extensively about vitamin D, and genuinely believed he had this covered. When we ran a simple blood panel, his active vitamin D levels were far lower than his supplementation history suggested they should be. His magnesium was low. He had never been told about K2. 3 years of daily supplementation and the biological conditions for it to work had never been in place. The practical takeaway here is straightforward. Magnesium glycinate, or magnesium malate, are the most bioavailable forms for seniors. They are gentle on the digestive system and well absorbed. Leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, and almonds are reliable dietary sources if you prefer to get it through food. For K2, look for the MK7 form specifically. It stays active in the body longer than other forms. Fermented foods and certain aged cheeses contain it naturally. I've noted the specific forms for both in the description, so you have a clear reference and don't end up with the wrong thing. Now that the delivery system is complete, absorption, timing, cofactors, we can talk about what you are actually building toward. Because the real question was never whether these supplements are absorbed, it was always whether they protect your brain. And the answer to that is more specific than most people expect. So we have covered absorption, timing, and cofactors. Now let's talk about what you are actually trying to protect, and what the research honestly says these two supplements can and cannot do for your brain. I want to start with honesty, because I think you deserve that more than you deserve reassurance. And I also want to tell you up front, there is a specific test that most seniors have never heard of, one that tells you whether any of this is actually working at the cellular level. I will give you the exact number to ask your doctor for before this section is over. But first, let me show you what the research actually found, because the results are more specific than most people expect. These supplements are not a cure for dementia. If anyone tells you otherwise, walk away. The randomized trials that have tested omega-3 and vitamin D supplementation in people with established Alzheimer's disease have been largely disappointing. By the time the disease has progressed to a clinical diagnosis, the damage to neurons and synaptic connections is extensive, and supplementation alone cannot reverse that. I will not pretend otherwise. But prevention is a genuinely different story, and the evidence there is meaningful enough that I talk about it with almost every patient I see who is still in the window where it matters. Here is what the data shows for omega-3 specifically. A meta-analysis that pooled results from 18 studies involving over 46,000 participants found that DHA, the specific omega-3 that your brain actively transports across the blood-brain barrier, reduced cognitive decline risk by 18%. That is not a trivial number. 18% is real, measurable protection. And in long-term supplement users, the risk reduction for Alzheimer's disease was even larger. We are talking about a 64% reduced risk in one large analysis of people who had been supplementing consistently over time. But notice the word consistently. This is not a one-month experiment. The benefits appear to build gradually, over months and years, as DHA accumulates in brain tissue. The MFSD2A transporter we talked about pulls DHA in incrementally with every dose. Think of it less like a switch and more like slowly filling a reservoir. And the research suggests that benefits plateau and become more reliable above 1 gram per day of combined EPA and DHA. Below that threshold, results across studies are inconsistent. There is also a practical tool that almost no one uses, and I consider it one of the most valuable tests a senior can ask for. It is called the Omega-3 Index. It measures the actual percentage of DHA and EPA in your red blood cells, not just what you are taking, but what is actually circulating and available at the cellular level. An index of around 8% appears to be the protective target associated with meaningful brain benefit. Most people who supplement are well below this. The test is simple. It is a blood draw, and it tells you whether your supplementation is actually working or just passing through. If you would rather not wait for a doctor's order, I have linked an at-home version of this test in the description below. Now for vitamin D. Low vitamin D levels have been associated with up to a 30% higher probability of cognitive impairment. Maintaining serum levels above 75 nanomoles per liter, that is the threshold that consistently appears in the research as meaningful for brain protection. Below that, the risk climbs. Above it, the neuroprotective mechanisms we discussed, amyloid clearance, inflammation regulation, vascular support, appear to function more reliably. And now here is the finding that I find most compelling of everything in this literature. One study looked at seniors who had optimal levels of both omega-3 and vitamin D in their blood at the same time. Not one or the other, both. Those individuals had a 4.6 times lower risk of dementia compared to people with low levels of both. To put that in context, carrying the APOE4 gene, which is the strongest known genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, triples dementia risk in most studies. The combined effect of having adequate omega-3 and vitamin D was larger than that genetic risk factor working against you. That is not a small finding. That is a reason to take this seriously. But I want to be precise about what this means. These were people with optimal blood levels, not just people who were swallowing capsules. The distinction is everything. Taking a supplement and having optimal levels are not the same thing, which is exactly why everything we have covered today, the fat, the cofactors, the timing, the testing, is not optional detail. It is the difference between the number on that study and the experience most people actually have. Let me bring everything together into something you can actually use. This is not a prescription. Please talk with your own doctor before making any changes, especially if you are on blood thinners or have kidney disease. But this is what the research supports, and it is what I walk my patients through. For omega-3, aim for at least 1 gram per day of combined EPA and DHA from a high-quality fish oil. DHA-rich formulations appear more beneficial for brain health specifically because DHA is the form your brain actively transports and stores. Take it with your largest fat-containing meal of the day. If you are taking more than 1 gram, split the dose, half in the morning, half in the evening, both with food that contains real fat. For vitamin D3, most seniors benefit from 1,000 to 2,000 IU daily. The Do Health trial used 2,000 IU and found measurable benefit. But the number on the bottle matters far less than the number in your blood. Get your 25-hydroxy-vitamin D level tested. The target is above 75 nanomoles per liter. If you are below that, no dose on a label will tell you what your body actually needs. Only the test will. Always pair your D3 with K2 in the MK7 form and make sure your magnesium is adequate. This is the cofactor triad that makes D3 actually convert and work. Without magnesium and K2, D3 is an incomplete intervention. Take omega-3 and D3 together at the same fat-rich meal to stabilize vitamin D levels rather than deplete them. And ask your doctor for an omega-3 index test. It is a simple blood draw. It tells you whether your supplementation is reaching your red blood cells at the level associated with brain protection. Most people who think they are covered are not. This test removes the guesswork entirely. But here is what I want you to understand before you close this video. Getting the absorption right, the fat, the cofactors, the timing, that is the foundation. What you have just done is fix the delivery system, and that matters enormously. What most people do not realize is that even when omega-3 reaches your bloodstream, there is still a specific barrier between your blood and your brain. And how well DHA crosses that barrier depends on something that has nothing to do with what you swallowed this morning. So where does that leave you right now? You have fixed the part most people never think about. That is real, that matters. But there is still one more layer, and if you stop here, you may be leaving the most important piece unfinished without knowing it. The next video on your screen is about what happens after absorption. It is about why some people do everything we covered today and still see their DHA fail to reach the brain tissue that needs it most. There is a specific factor, one that is almost never discussed, that quietly determines whether the DHA you are now absorbing actually gets through to where it protects you. I made that video specifically as the next step from this one. If what we talked about today matters to you, that video is not optional. It is what completes this. Go watch it now while this is still fresh. Your brain does not get a second window on this.